The grand throne room of the Zirathi Empire stretched wider than a human city square. Tall black pillars rose to the ceiling, carved with the faces of past rulers who had conquered countless star systems. Yet, despite the shining banners and the glowing crystals that lit the hall, there was no warmth within its walls. Silence reigned, broken only by the soft hum of alien machinery. Upon the throne sat Queen Velithra, the ruler of the Zirathi. Her armor was forged from metals mined, in dying stars, her crown shaped like the wings of a predator bird. To most she looked untouchable, a queen feared by billions. But behind her sharp eyes, she carried a weight heavier than any crown. Velithra had ruled through strength and fear, never allowing weakness to show. But victory after victory had not filled the emptiness in her heart. Allies betrayed her. Rivals plotted, and even her own council spoke behind her back. The galaxy bowed, yet she felt utterly alone. That day the guards dragged in a prisoner unlike any she had seen before. A human, rare in this part of space. His wrists were bound with glowing chains, but his back remained straight. His uniform was torn, but the insignia on his chest showed he was once a commander. His name was Elias Rourke. The alien guards forced him to his knees before the throne. "Your Majesty," one of them hissed in their native tongue, "we bring you the leader of the human outpost that dared resist your fleet." Velithra's eyes narrowed. She expected fear. Every creature brought before her trembled, begged, or broke. But this human did none of those things. His face was calm, his eyes steady, and when he looked at her, it was not with terror, it was with curiosity. "You stand before the Queen of the Zirathi," Velithra said, her voice echoing through the hall. "Do you understand that your life belongs to me?" Elias tilted his head slightly as if considering her words. "My life has always belonged to me," he said softly, his voice carrying despite the vast room. "But I do understand you hold power here." Velithra leaned forward. Few dared to speak so plainly to her. "Power," she repeated. "Power is the only thing that keeps order in this universe. Without it, everything falls to chaos." Or, Elias replied, "Without trust, everything falls to fear." The guards hissed angrily, ready to strike him for such words. But Velithra raised her hand. Her gaze locked on the human, studying him like a puzzle she could not solve. He was fragile compared to her kind, weaker in strength, shorter in height. Yet he spoke as if he had no chains. For a long moment, silence stretched. Then, almost against her will, Velithra whispered words she had never spoken aloud. "No one could ever love me." The words left her lips before she could stop them. They were not meant for a prisoner. They were not meant for anyone. She had buried such thoughts deep within her heart, under years of war and steel. But something about this human, the way he looked at her, not as a monster, not as a ruler, but simply as another being, pulled the truth out of her. Elias did not flinch. Instead, his lips curved into a small, calm smile. It was not a mocking smile. It was not the smile of someone who pitied her. It was simple, quiet, and strangely warm. Velithra felt something stir inside her chest, something she had not felt in years. She quickly masked her expression, leaning back into her throne, hiding the confusion within. "Why do you smile, human?" she demanded. "Do you not understand the meaning of my words?" "I understand them," Elias said, "and I smile because you are wrong." The hall fell silent again. The guards glanced at one another, unsure if the queen would strike him down for such boldness. But Velithra did nothing. Her sharp eyes stayed fixed on him, her mind racing. No one had ever dared to answer her loneliness before. No one had dared to suggest she was wrong. For the rest of the day, she dismissed her council early. She ordered the human kept alive in quarters close to her own. The decision shocked her guards, but none questioned her. That night, alone in her chambers, Velithra sat by the window of her fortress palace. Outside, stars burned in the black sea of space, countless worlds within her grasp. Yet even as the galaxy lay beneath her feet, Her mind returned to the smile of one fragile human. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself it was weakness to dwell on such things. But deep inside, where the queen's armor could not reach, a small spark had been lit. For the first time in centuries, Velithra felt curious. The next morning, the Zirathi palace buzzed with its usual routine. Guards patrolling the black hallways, advisors whispering strategy, and servants scurrying with the queen's demands. But somewhere deep in the grand corridors, Commander Elias Rourke remained confined to a small holding chamber near the throne room. Despite his restraints, he moved with quiet confidence, never letting fear show in his eyes. Velithra, watching him from her high throne, found herself increasingly distracted. Every time she spoke with her council, she caught her mind wandering back to the human. His calmness, his defiance, and the strange warmth in his smile were unlike anything she had encountered. Her first test of him came during a council meeting. Velithra commanded her generals to present the state of their defenses, expecting Elias to shrink at the sight of alien warships, star maps, and laser fleets. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes scanning the holographic displays with curiosity. "Your fleet is strong," Elias said in measured tones, "but it lacks flexibility. If an enemy fleet attacks from unexpected angles, your defenses could fail." Gasps echoed through the chamber. A human dared criticize the military of the Zirathi Empire. One general, scales glinting under the crystal lights, hissed in disbelief. "You know nothing of strategy," he shouted. Velithra held up her hand, silencing him. She turned to Elias, her eyes sharp. "Explain your reasoning." Elias pointed at the holographic battle simulations. "Look here. Your flanking ships follow predictable routes. An intelligent commander could exploit that pattern. But if your formations were irregular, unpredictable, you'd have an advantage. Strength alone isn't enough." For a moment the room was silent except for the low hum of the simulation. Then Velithra's lips curved into a subtle smile. He was right. His observations were logical, simple, and yet entirely unexpected. The council grumbled, but Velithra dismissed them. "Let him stay," she said. "We will see what he truly knows." Later that evening, Velithra walked through the corridors alone. The palace was quieter than usual, the hum of machinery blending with the faint whispers of the stars outside. She approached the human's chamber, curious about him, not for interrogation, but for understanding. "Human," she called softly. Elias looked up from the small cot where he rested. "Your Majesty?" Velithra studied him. She had been trained to detect fear, cunning, and lies. But Elias had none of these. His calm gaze met hers without flinching, and his body language betrayed neither submission nor arrogance. "You do not fear me," she said, almost as if testing herself. "I respect you," Elias replied. "Fear is not respect. I can follow orders without fearing you." Velithra blinked. Respect. She had long thought that respect could only be bought with fear. Yet here was a human, bound in chains, offering something different, something genuine. She moved closer, lowering her voice. "Tell me, why do you smile so often?" Elias's smile remained quiet, unshaken. "Because even in darkness there is always light. Even in chains there is always choice." Smiling. "It reminds me of that." Velithra felt an unfamiliar tug in her chest. It was a strange feeling, like the first crack in ice too thick to break. She turned away, muttering something under her breath. "Perhaps it is foolish to think a human could teach me anything." But her thoughts returned to him again and again. She found herself observing the small ways he adapted, how he moved around the guards, how he noted the layout of the palace, and how he spoke with clarity and intelligence. He was fragile, yet he seemed unbreakable in spirit. The next few days passed with careful observation. Velithra began testing Elias in private, simple challenges at first. She would ask him questions about Zirathi history, tactics, and science. Sometimes she presented moral dilemmas, seeing how he reacted under pressure. And each time, Elias surprised her. His answers were never just clever. They showed understanding, empathy, and a mind that could match her own. One afternoon, Velithra summoned him to the observation deck overlooking the city of Zirath. The alien capital glimmered under multiple suns, towers of crystal and steel stretching into the sky. She leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "Do you see this, human?" she asked. "I built this empire. I conquered worlds. And yet, I feel hollow. Why is that?" Elias studied the city silently for a moment. "Because you rule with power, not connection," he said softly. "Empires built on fear alone may last, but they never bring joy. They never bring love." Velithra's jaw tightened. Love, a concept she had abandoned long ago. And yet, when he said it, it did not sound like mockery. It sounded honest. "You speak as if you understand," she said, voice low, almost a whisper, "but you are only human. What could you possibly know of the burdens I carry?" Elias turned to her, his smile steady. "I may not have conquered galaxies, Your Majesty, but I know what it means to care for someone, to fight for someone, and to never give up on them, even when it seems impossible." Velithra looked away, hiding the stirrings of something she had long thought impossible: hope. For the first time, she felt that maybe the galaxy did not have to be a lonely place. Maybe, in some strange... Velithra awoke before the twin suns rose over the capital of Zirath. The palace was quiet, but her mind was restless. Since bringing the human, Elias, closer to her court, she had felt an unfamiliar mixture of curiosity and caution. He was clever, brave, and endlessly calm, but not everyone in her empire trusted a human among them. The first warning came that morning in the form of whispers. Members of the council gathered in the high chamber, voices low but urgent. Velithra, seated at her throne, listened without interrupting. "The human presence is dangerous," hissed a general with silver-scaled arms. "Our enemies would see weakness in his proximity, and some within our ranks. They may not tolerate it." Velithra's eyes narrowed. "Who, exactly?" she asked. Another council member stepped forward, his voice tight. "General Klyros, Your Majesty. He believes your judgment is clouded. He plots to replace you if your decisions continue to favor the human." Velithra's hands tightened around the arms of her throne. Klyros, a man who had once commanded her respect. Now he saw her openness as a vulnerability, yet she felt no fear. The threat did not terrify her. It intrigued her. That afternoon, Velithra called Elias to the council chamber. The human walked in, chains faintly glowing, yet his shoulders held steady. He looked at the generals with no hint of intimidation. "Human," Velithra said, "you will remain with me during these meetings. Watch carefully and speak only when asked." Elias inclined his head. "Yes, Your Majesty." The generals exchanged glances. Their whispers filled the room like shadows creeping along the walls. They expected the human to flinch or falter. Instead, he observed with sharp, intelligent eyes. Velithra began the meeting discussing fleet movements and planetary defenses. The discussion turned to the threat of rebellion from Klyros. "Your Majesty," Elias said softly, "if Klyros is planning betrayal, it will likely involve subtle moves, not open attacks. Watch for changes in orders, unusual troop movements, and attempts to isolate you from allies." Velithra studied him. His logic was simple, yet precise. "And you? Trust your judgment to notice these things?" she asked. "I trust that if we pay attention," Elias said, "we can stop betrayal before it becomes disaster." The council erupted in protest, but Velithra silenced them. She was testing him, not only his mind, but the courage to stand, firm in the face of powerful aliens who had ruled fear for centuries. That night, she and Elias walked along the balcony overlooking the city. The towers of Zirath shimmered like thousands of stars fallen to the ground. "Do you think you can truly help me stop a coup?" she asked, her voice low. Elias looked at her without hesitation. Yes, but not alone, Your Majesty. You need allies. You can trust, and I can help you find them. Velithra studied him, wondering if trust could really exist in an empire built on fear. But something about his calm, unwavering gaze made her believe it could. Over the next days, Velithra and Elias worked in secret. They watched Klyros closely, noting his movements, the orders he gave, and the whispers among his followers. Elias suggested subtle countermeasures, repositioning trusted guards, sending false reports, and planting subtle traps for traitors. Velithra found herself relying on him more than she expected. It was strange, almost dangerous to feel a bond with someone so different from her own kind. But she could not deny the effectiveness of his ideas. Every plan he suggested prevented potential disaster. One evening, Velithra entered the strategy room to find Elias reviewing maps of the outer colonies. "You've been busy," she said. "Not busy enough," he replied. "I noticed something unusual in Klyros's fleet. He's sending small groups to the border systems. They could be spies or scouts for the rebellion." Velithra's sharp eyes studied the maps. "Then we will act first," she said. "Prepare a countermeasure, subtle, precise, and decisive." Elias smiled faintly. "Exactly. Strike before they realize it's a trap." Together they crafted a plan that used the strengths of both Zirathi and human logic. Velithra commanded her elite units, while Elias analyzed data and predicted enemy moves. It was a strange partnership, human intuition and alien precision, but it worked. Days later, the conspiracy began to unravel. Klyros's small squads were intercepted quietly, leaders captured before they could strike. The palace remained untouched, and the council remained unaware that the human had been instrumental in their safety. Velithra felt a strange pride, not only in saving her empire but in the human who had fought alongside her. She realized that bravery and intelligence could come in forms she had never expected. That night she stood in her private chambers, looking at the stars beyond the palace windows. She spoke quietly to herself, a thought she had never admitted, aloud. Perhaps strength is not only in ruling with fear," she whispered. And for the first time in centuries, she felt the faint warmth of hope. A human, fragile, small, and yet fearless, had reminded her that even in an empire of shadows there could be light. Elias, in his own chamber nearby, looked at the same stars. He thought of the queen, not as a distant ruler, but as someone burdened, lonely, and capable of change. His smile remained quiet, a silent promise that no matter the threat, he would stand with her. The galaxy beyond Zirath was vast and dangerous, but within the palace walls, an unlikely alliance had formed. A human and an alien queen facing the darkness together, preparing for the trials yet to come. And the Shadow War had only just begun. The palace of Zirath had never been so tense. Guards paced the black hallways like restless predators. The glow of the crystal light seemed sharper, harsher, casting long shadows over the polished floors. Today the rebellion led by General Klyros would make its move, or so the reports warned. Velithra sat upon her throne, her fingers lightly resting on the arms carved from obsidian. Beside her, Elias stood quietly, chains removed for the first time, his human form contrasting with the tall, armored Zirathi counselors. She did not need to speak. Her presence alone commanded attention, but she did not lower her guard. Not now. A warning horn echoed through the palace. It was subtle, a soft vibration through the floors, but Velithra and Elias had both heard it. The first wave had arrived. "Stay here," Velithra ordered, her voice steady yet firm. "Do not leave my side." Elias inclined his head. "Of course, Your Majesty." The palace doors trembled under the force of Klyros's loyalists. They expected chaos, confusion, and fear among the defenders. Instead, they found calm precision. Velithra's elite guards, trained to respond instantly, met the intruders at every corridor, and alongside them, Elias moved, directing defenders, predicting enemy tactics and helping turn the tide before the first blow even landed. Velithra's heart raced, not from fear, but from exhilaration. Here, in the heat of battle, she could see the human in his true element. His mind worked like a finely tuned instrument, and his courage never faltered. Even surrounded by Zirathi and human alike, he never hesitated. Through the corridors, clashes of energy blades and plasma rifles rang out. Aliens lunged, humans countered, and the palace shook with the force of the battle. But Velithra moved like a shadow, her own blade slicing through obstacles, her eyes calculating every threat. "Elias?" she called at one point, standing atop the grand staircase. "Are the western halls secure?" "Yes, Your Majesty," he answered, "but Klyros has split his forces. He plans to reach the council chamber." Velithra nodded. "Then we intercept him." They moved together, a strange pair, queen and human, alien and earthborn. Their movements complemented each other. Where Velithra relied on raw strength and experience, Elias relied on quick thinking and strategy. Guards followed their lead, inspired by their courage, and even hesitant soldiers found renewed energy. In the council chamber, Klyros waited with his personal guards. He had expected the queen to cower, her human prisoner to break, and chaos to spread. What he found instead was an organized defense, a calculated counterattack. His surprise was almost comical but deadly. Velithra faced him, her voice cold and sharp. "Klyros, you have betrayed me. Now, you will pay." Klyros sneered. "You are weak, Velithra. You cannot protect yourself, let alone this empire." Elias stepped forward, placing a hand near the queen, not as a human who feared, but as an ally who stood beside her. "You underestimate her," he said quietly, but Klyros heard. "And that will be your downfall." The battle erupted in the chamber. Klyros's guards charged, only to be met with the combined strength of Velithra and her elite forces. Plasma blades clashed, energy shields sparked, and the sound of combat echoed off the crystalline walls. Elias directed soldiers, disarmed enemies, and ensured that the queen's flanks were protected. Velithra fought with unmatched skill, her blade a blur of motion. But even as she moved, she felt the sting of an unexpected strike. Klyros himself had slipped through a weak point in her defenses. "Elias," she called, her voice sharp. He moved instantly, intercepting Klyros before he could land a second blow. The human's quick thinking and courage saved her in a split second. Velithra's eyes softened for a brief moment, a fleeting feeling of trust, gratitude, and something deeper she refused to name. Together they cornered Klyros in the center of the chamber. Velithra's blade pointed at him, her breathing steady. Elias stood to her side, calm and unwavering. "It is over," he said simply. Klyros glared at them, but he saw the truth. He had underestimated not only the queen's strength, but the human's courage. With a final hiss, The morning after the battle, the Zirathi palace was calm again. The silence was no longer heavy with fear, but soft, filled with the quiet hum of recovery. Velithra walked through the corridors slowly, her armor removed, revealing the weariness of someone who had faced death and survived. Every step reminded her of the chaos of the previous day, the clash of weapons, the roar of guards, and the courage of a human who had stood beside her. Elias was waiting in her private chambers as he always was. The human had insisted on remaining close despite the dangers. He had moved swiftly through the palace during the battle, coordinating defenses, ensuring the queen's safety, and now he simply observed her quietly, as if waiting for her to speak. "You performed admirably yesterday," Velithra said, her voice softer than it had been in decades. "I did not expect you to be so steadfast." Elias inclined his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I only did what was necessary. Your Majesty's life, and the Empire, depended on it." Velithra sat, her hands clasped in front of her. She studied him, trying to understand why. She felt a strange warmth in her chest. It was a feeling she had buried long ago, thinking it unfit for a queen of the Zirathi. And yet, here it was, uninvited and undeniable. Tell me, she began hesitantly. Why do you risk so much for me? For a queen? You barely know? Elias's eyes met hers with quiet certainty. Because I see more than a queen. I see a person who carries the weight of a galaxy and still chooses to fight. And someone who deserves loyalty and trust, not fear. Velithra blinked, startled by the honesty. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not a general, not an advisor, not even her closest allies. To hear it from a human, someone so fragile compared to the might of the Zirathi, was jarring. Yet it also felt right. Over the next few days, Velithra allowed herself to recover, but her mind could not rest. She walked through the palace gardens, observing the alien flora, the sparkling pools, and the statues of her ancestors. Every corner of the palace reminded her of power, conquest, and rule. But now it also reminded her of something else. Companionship. Elias often accompanied her, quietly, never intruding, but always present. They spoke about strategy, the empire, and occasionally about simpler things, stories of Earth, songs humans sang, and the little joys of life that had nothing to do with war or politics. One evening, Velithra found herself on the observation deck, gazing at the stars. The galaxy stretched endlessly before her, countless worlds and possibilities. She sighed, a sound she rarely allowed herself to make. You are quiet tonight, Elias said softly, standing beside her. Velithra hesitated. I think about the empire, about the future, and I think about myself. Elias turned to her, curious but gentle. And what do you see? I see someone who has ruled for centuries, yet has never allowed herself to care for anything, or anyone, truly. I see a queen who has never trusted her own heart. Elias smiled, that quiet, steady smile she had come to rely on. Then perhaps it is time to change that, to allow yourself to feel, even if it is frightening. Strength does not always come from conquest. Sometimes it comes from trust. Velithra felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never heard words like these from anyone, especially not a human, and yet they made sense. Perhaps the greatest strength was not in fear or domination, but in opening oneself to connection. Days passed and the empire slowly returned to normal. Soldiers patrolled the streets, council meetings resumed, and the people of Zirath began to rebuild trust in their queen. But within the palace, Velithra's thoughts remained focused on one human. One afternoon she found herself speaking aloud, as if to the stars themselves. I thought no one could ever care for me. No one could see past the crown, past the armor, past the fear I inspire, but perhaps someone can. Elias, who had entered silently, remained quiet, letting her voice carry her thoughts. When she finished, he stepped forward, speaking softly. Someone already does, Your Majesty, and that is enough to change everything. Velithra turned to him, her eyes searching. She saw honesty, courage, and a calm certainty that surprised her. For the first time in centuries, she allowed herself to believe that she could trust, not only the human, but the feeling that grew quietly inside her. Your presence here, she admitted, it is unusual. For a human, for anyone. Elias smiled faintly. Perhaps, but sometimes the unusual is exactly what the world needs. That evening, Velithra walked through the halls, observing her court. She noticed the loyalty of her soldiers, the cautious respect of her council, and the way her empire thrived even after betrayal had threatened to destroy it. And through it all, she realized that she was no longer alone in carrying the weight of the galaxy. Elias had become more than an advisor, more than a companion in battle. He was a reminder that courage, loyalty, and trust could exist in places she had long thought empty. And in seeing him smile, even after all the darkness and danger, Velithra began to understand a truth she had once denied, that even a queen could allow herself to feel. That night, she stood at the window of her private chambers, gazing at the stars, Her heart was lighter, her mind clearer. The galaxy remained vast, filled with unknown dangers and endless possibilities. But she no longer faced it alone. For the first time, Velithra allowed herself a small, quiet hope. A hope that trust, friendship, and perhaps even love could exist, even in the heart of a queen who had once believed no one could ever care for her. And Elias, in his own quarters nearby, looked at the same stars, his quiet smile a silent promise. No matter what challenges awaited, they would face them together. The galaxy beyond Zirath was quiet, but that quiet was deceptive. Reports had arrived of a distant fleet approaching the capital, enemies who hoped to strike while the Empire was still recovering from the attempted coup. Velithra stood in the observation chamber, her eyes fixed on the tiny blinking lights that marked the invading ships. Beside her, Elias studied the data on a holographic screen. The human had been a constant presence since the coup, advising her, protecting her, and teaching her to trust both her instincts and others. Together, they had rebuilt the palace's defenses, repaired morale among the soldiers, and restored order in the city. But this was the final test. The fleet is larger than I expected, Elias said calmly, but they move predictably. If we act strategically, we can force them into a trap. Velithra's fingers rested lightly on the railing. She felt the weight of the Empire once again, but unlike before, she did not feel alone. Elias's calm presence reminded her that strength was not in fear alone, but in unity and trust. We will fight together, she said, her voice steady, not just as queen and human, but as allies. Our strength will be in our bond as much as our armies. Elias smiled quietly, the same serene smile that had first unsettled her, that had first sparked something long forgotten in her heart. Exactly, Your Majesty. Let's show them what true courage looks like. The battle began as the enemy fleet reached the outskirts of Zirath. Lasers cut through the darkness of space, and ships maneuvered with deadly precision. Velithra commanded the Zirathi forces, issuing orders that combined her centuries of experience with Elias's sharp insights. Flank their left side, Elias instructed. Their central ships are slower than they think. Use their speed against them. Velithra's elite ships obeyed, weaving through the stars with astonishing coordination. The humans' calculations proved accurate. Enemy vessels were caught in crossfire, forced into vulnerable positions. Every decision she made alongside him brought her empire closer to victory. Inside the palace, Velithra observed the city below. Citizens watched the battle in awe, inspired by the queen who had faced betrayal, rebellion, and now an invading fleet, and still stood resolute. Hours passed, the fight stretching from the edge of Zirath's atmosphere to the outermost planets. Yet, despite the scale, the queen and the human remained calm, their combined strategy turning chaos into precision. Finally, the enemy's flagship broke formation, and their fleet began retreating. Velithra allowed herself a small, victorious smile. Beside her, Elias's quiet satisfaction mirrored her own. Together, they had turned near defeat into a resounding triumph. As the battle ended, the queen stepped onto the balcony, the twin suns setting behind the horizon, casting the city in shades of gold and crimson. Elias joined her, and they stood, side by side, observing the victory. Do you see it? Velithra asked quietly. The galaxy still holds danger, yet we prevailed. Together. Elias nodded. Yes, and that is the true power of trust. Not fear, not domination, but standing with those who believe in you. Velithra turned to him, her eyes searching. For centuries, she had thought no one could ever care for her beyond her power, beyond her throne. But now, she saw something she had never dared to imagine, a bond of loyalty, courage, and something deeper, something she refused to name but felt in every heartbeat. Elias, she said softly, why did you stay with me? After everything, why risk so much for a queen who ruled with fear? He smiled, calm and certain. Because I saw more than a queen. I saw someone who deserved trust, someone who could inspire greatness in others, not just through power, but through courage and compassion. And I knew that even in the darkest moments, standing together mattered more than standing alone. Velithra's eyes softened. She realized then that she had been wrong for